You're a disgrace, not a wife. I'm filing for divorce, her husband declared at Sophie's anniversary celebration in front of all the guests, hoping to humiliate her. Finally. No more supporting my husband and his mother, she thought wearily. So, everyone here today, before we continue, please write in the comments which country you're watching this video from. Enjoy listening. Sophie darted around the apartment like a squirrel in a wheel. Today was her 38th birthday, and she also had to submit a quarterly report, oversee the catering for the party, and most importantly, prevent Claudette, her mother-in-law, from turning everything into a living hell. "Sophie, why are you running around like a headless chicken?" came Claudette's dissatisfied voice from the kitchen. "Did you even check the meat? What if it's over-salted like last time? Honestly, when will you learn to cook properly?" Sophie took a deep breath, trying to hold on to her last shred of composure. "Claudette, the meat is fine. I didn't even touch it. We ordered it from a restaurant. Remember restaurants?" "Humph," snorted her mother-in-law. "Just throwing money away. In my day, we cooked everything ourselves and no one died. But now it's all restaurants, catering. Laziness has completely taken over." Sophie stayed silent, knowing arguing was pointless. Claudette always found something to nitpick. It seemed her mother-in-law's sole purpose in life was to prove Sophie's inadequacy daily. She glanced at the clock. 10 a.m. There was still plenty of time before the guests arrived, but the feeling of being late haunted her constantly. She still needed to finish a presentation for tomorrow's client meeting, check the guest list, and, if there was time, maybe powder her nose. Etienne, her husband, was, as usual, sprawled on the couch in front of the TV. "Etienne, could you help with something?" Sophie asked tentatively. "The guests will be here soon." Etienne lazily switched channels. "Sophie, what kind of helper am I? You know I'm a creative soul. I need inspiration, not kitchen chores." "Creative soul," Sophie repeated to herself. That's what Etienne had been calling himself for years, ever since his promising startup crashed spectacularly. Since then, he'd been finding himself, spending days on the couch, playing video games, and criticizing everything and everyone. Meanwhile, Sophie carried the load: the mortgage, bills, groceries, even his sister's loan, which, of course, he couldn't leave unpaid. The apartment they lived in was inherited from Sophie's grandmother. It was the only valuable thing she owned. Her grandmother always said, "Hold on to your corner, Sophie. Life can be unpredictable." And how right she was. Sophie worked as a marketer in a large company. She loved her job and was successful and respected by colleagues. But at home, a different reality awaited: constant stress, reproaches, and the feeling of being trapped. A trap she had built for herself. She remembered meeting Etienne. He seemed so romantic, so passionate. He read her poetry, took her to the movies, gave her flowers. But gradually, he stopped working, stopped helping around the house, stopped being romantic. He became a parasite, draining her energy. And Claudette? Oh, Claudette was a story of her own. This woman considered it her duty to control every aspect of Sophie's life, from her clothing choices to how she cooked borscht. Lately, Sophie caught herself thinking, "I'm in a prison, not a marriage." She looked in the mirror and saw a tired, worn-out woman who had forgotten herself, her dreams, her desires. She lived for others, neglecting her own right to happiness. She walked to the window and gazed at the city. Just then, her phone rang. It was Amélie, her best friend. "Sophie, hi. Ready for the party? I'm on my way. Hang in there, we'll be there soon." Sophie smiled. Her friends always supported her. They saw how hard things were and always tried to cheer her up, offer advice, or just listen. She knew they'd be by her side tonight, no matter what. "Thanks, Amélie. I'm waiting," Sophie replied and hung up. She glanced at the clock again. Time was slipping away relentlessly. Today was her birthday, and she decided it was time for a change. No more living for others. It was time to live for herself. She returned to her work, trying to focus on numbers and charts, but her thoughts were far away, in the new life she dreamed of. A life without Etienne, without Claudette, without the constant guilt. A life where there would only be her dreams, and her freedom. Guests gathered for Sophie's 38th birthday. Her parents arrived early, helping set the table, though her mother discreetly wiped away a tear while looking at her daughter. Friends arrived closer to the appointed time with flowers and small gifts. Colleagues, mostly from the marketing department, weren't far behind, animatedly discussing the latest company news. Everyone congratulated Sophie, offering warm words, wishing her success, health, and, of course, personal happiness. Sophie smiled back, trying not to show the slightest hint of nervousness, though an ocean of emotions raged inside. She felt like an actress playing the role of a happy wife and successful woman, a role she'd been playing for years. Etienne, as usual, slipped out to avoid helping. He showed up when the guests were already gathered, with a careless demeanor and a bouquet of slightly wilted roses. He kissed Sophie on the cheek, tossing out, "Happy birthday, old lady." The celebration went on. Guests ate, drank, and chatted. Sophie tried to give attention to everyone, but Etienne kept hovering, throwing snide remarks and subtly glaring at her. Something seemed to irritate him. Perhaps the attention Sophie was getting, or her composure. Midway through the evening, when the toasts were nearly done, Etienne suddenly stood up. The room fell silent, everyone looking at him in surprise. "You know," he began, slurring his words, "I've had enough of this." Sophie felt a chill inside. She knew something bad was coming. "Sophie," he continued, staring at her with drunken eyes, "you're a disgrace, not a wife. Always working, always complaining, always nagging me. I can't take it anymore. I'm filing for divorce." A deathly silence fell over the room. Sophie's mother clutched a napkin tightly. Her father frowned. Friends and colleagues exchanged bewildered glances. No one expected this turn of events. Sophie stood frozen. She had anticipated this moment, but it still hurt. The humiliation, the betrayal, the realization that she'd spent years with someone who didn't value her. But contrary to Etienne's expectations, Sophie didn't cry or defend herself. She simply exhaled calmly and looked him straight in the eye. Sophie paused, savoring the silence that hung in the room. The shock on the guests' faces spoke louder than words. Etienne, red with rage and humiliation, looked utterly lost. Only now, seeing him like this, did she realize how long she'd lived in an illusion, convincing herself his creative impulses were temporary struggles, not chronic laziness and irresponsibility. She slowly scanned the room, her parents, friends, colleagues. Their eyes showed support, empathy, and most importantly, understanding. They saw what she'd tried to hide from herself. Her unhappy marriage, her sacrifices, her exhaustion. Sophie took a deep breath and, keeping her voice steady, began. "Etienne says he's filing for divorce. Well, I won't stand in his way. In fact, I'm ready for it." She turned away from her husband and walked to a small table where her purse lay. Opening it, Sophie pulled out a prepared folder of documents. "As you know." Her voice was calm and confident. This apartment was inherited from my grandmother. It's been our only home. She pulled out a notarized deed. A few months ago, just in case, I transferred it to my parents. It's now their property. And as far as I understand, Etienne no longer has any claim to it. Etienne's face showed confusion, turning to panic. He'd clearly assumed he could claim part of the apartment after the divorce. This news hit him hard. Sophie turned back to him. There was no anger or resentment in her gaze, only weariness and resolve. As for finances, she pulled a bank statement from the folder. My salary is my personal funds. For a long time I supported not only myself but you, Etienne, your mother, and even helped pay off your sister's loan. But that's over. She paused, letting her words sink in. The room was so quiet you could hear the clock ticking on the wall. I'm done supporting anyone else. I want to live for myself. I want to do what I love. I want to be happy. She looked at the guests again, this time with a slight smile. Then she raised a glass of champagne, quietly handed to her by a friend. So I propose a toast to my freedom, to a new life. To a life where I'm my own master. Sophie raised her glass high. This isn't just a birthday. Her voice was firm and confident. It's the day I set myself free. The room erupted in loud applause. Sophie's parents clapped first, followed by friends and colleagues. Tears glistened in many eyes, tears of joy for Sophie, relief and admiration for her courage. Sophie's mother, Annette, wiped away a tear and approached her daughter. She hugged her tightly, whispering, I always knew you were strong, but I had no idea how much. Her father, Pierre, silently handed Sophie a glass filled to the brim with champagne. He nodded, his eyes full of pride and support. Sophie felt a lump in her throat. She barely held back tears. She was endlessly grateful to her parents for their love and understanding. They had always been her rock, even when she doubted herself. Sophie's friends, Camille and Amélie, rushed to her, hugging her from both sides. Sophie, you're incredible, Camille exclaimed. I always knew you could do this. We're so happy for you, Amélie added. You're finally free. Her colleagues didn't hold back either. They approached, offering congratulations and support. Sophie, we always knew you deserved better, said Julien, a colleague and old friend. Don't doubt yourself. You'll succeed. Sophie smiled at him. The support of friends and colleagues meant the world to her. She knew she wouldn't be alone during this challenging time. Etienne stood aside, as if struck by lightning. He couldn't believe what had happened. He'd always thought Sophie was weak and dependent on him. He thought he could manipulate her forever, but he was wrong. Claudette jumped up to him, trying to say something, but Etienne brushed her off. He was too angry and humiliated to listen to her reproaches. Etienne tried to protest, mumbling something about how she had no right, how he was an artist. But his feeble attempts were drowned out by the applause. Friends, colleagues, even distant relatives, all supported Sophie. Their eyes showed admiration for her courage and strength. No one expected such a resolute stand from the quiet, always compliant Sophie. Suddenly, Etienne grabbed a half-empty bottle of vodka from the table and splashed its contents on the floor. "Go to hell!" he shouted. "Die alone!" The guests gasped. The act was so vile and low that even those most loyal to Etienne turned away. Sophie didn't flinch. She looked at him calmly and said, "Leave and never come back into my life." Claudette, red with fury, grabbed Etienne's arm and dragged him out of the apartment. She hissed something in his ear, but the noise drowned out her words. Etienne resisted, trying to say something to Sophie, but his mother pulled him farther until they disappeared behind the door. When they were gone, silence settled over the room. Sophie looked at her guests and smiled. "Well," she said, "shall we continue the party?" Loud applause and cheers erupted. The evening went on, but the atmosphere changed. The tension and stiffness were gone, replaced by ease and warmth. "We'll always be here," her father added, "no matter what." Sophie felt tears welling up. She hugged her parents and whispered, "Thank you for everything." The party continued. Guests toasted Sophie, wishing her happiness and success in her new life. Everyone felt this wasn't just a birthday, but a turning point, the start of a new chapter in Sophie's life. Sophie chatted with friends, laughed, and joked. She felt free and happy like never before. She knew challenges lay ahead, but she was ready. She had the support of her loved ones and wasn't alone. Late at night, the guests began to leave. The apartment felt empty and foreign. It no longer held warmth or comfort. It was where she'd spent years of her life, but now it felt like a prison. She walked to the window and looked at the city. Outside, the streetlights dimmed, but in her life, a new light was dawning. Sophie undressed and slipped into bed. She closed her eyes, trying to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. Her mind swirled with thoughts, memories, and plans. She felt excited and nervous. Finally, toward morning, she fell asleep. She dreamed she was flying over the city like a bird, feeling light and free, soaring through the skies, marveling at the world's beauty. When Sophie woke, she felt rested and renewed. She got out of bed, walked to the window, and opened it. Fresh morning air hit her face. She breathed deeply and smiled. Today was the first day of her new life. She was ready. She was strong. She was free. She went to the kitchen and brewed a cup of coffee. Sitting at the table, she began planning her day. There were many things to sort out: the divorce, work. But she wasn't afraid. She knew she could handle it all. The doorbell rang. Sophie was surprised. Who could be here so early? She opened the door to find Claudette standing there, looking angry and irritated. "I'm here to talk," she said. "You broke Etienne." Sophie sighed. She knew this conversation was inevitable. "Come in," she said, "but I don't promise you'll like what you hear." Claudette stepped inside and looked around. "You think you've won?" she asked. "You think you're happy?" "Yes," Sophie replied. "For the first time in a long time I am." "You'll regret this," Claudette said. "You'll come crawling back to Etienne begging for forgiveness." "No," Sophie said. "That will never happen. I'm done living for others. I'm living for myself now." "You're selfish," Claudette shouted. "You only think of yourself." "And is that so bad?" Sophie asked. "Don't I deserve happiness? Don't I deserve to live the way I want?" Claudette fell silent. She didn't know how to respond. She was used to Sophie always giving in, always doing what she was told. But now everything had changed. Sophie no longer feared her. "You destroyed our family," Claudette said, holding back tears. "You took Etienne's future." "Etienne destroyed his own life," Sophie replied. "I just helped him see it, and maybe gave him a chance to start over." Claudette glared at Sophie with hatred. "I'll never forgive you for this," she said. "I don't care," Sophie replied. "I'm not living for your forgiveness anymore. I'm living for myself." Claudette turned and stormed out, slamming the door. Sophie sighed with relief. She knew she'd shed another heavy burden. Now she was truly